Mr. Perry Husband, how are you, sir?
I'm good.
I'm excited to have you on, and you, sir, are a pioneer in the world of baseball science. You've introduced a lot of the metrics that we use in today's game, such as exit velocity, launch angle, effective velocity, tunneling, and stuff like that. So why don't you kind of tell our listeners in a nutshell, if someone were to ask you what you do, how would you define what you do?
I would think at the most core level, I'm a baseball instructor. That's how it all started. Was with me doing. I had a little baseball school, and in doing lessons and clinics and testing, I started making all these weird aha moments because when you look at hitting the way I look at it, and that is I wanted to find out, like everybody else, what the best mechanics were, and the best mechanics needed to be tested. So that's why I started with the exit velocity, and we got Jay Bell, who was a 17-year big leaguer at the time, and was with the Diamondbacks, but he was my roommate in minor league baseball, and I got him to do a video with us, which was just kind of a before and after. We tested his swing, put it on film with exit velocity, and then we also added an element of of seeing how close to perfect he could make contact both off the tee and in live. And so, in when you start looking at it that closely, we put a target 50 feet away. So if you could just picture the back of a cage, we had a target set up to where if you hit it perfect, it was a small little area about the size of the strike zone. But at 50 feet away, that's pretty minute. And so his job was to try to hit it perfect in the middle. And we measured that. We looked at the exit speed, how hard it was coming off the bat. We looked at how far right or left, how far up or down. So the launch angle was something that was built into the target. And when we started looking at it super closely, there was just all these questions that started coming up. Was, if it's that hard to hit a ball sitting on a tee that a Major League Baseball player has trouble hitting more than three out of, in fact, it was actually 1 out of 10 was perfect. And that was what I had found in all my working with kids, was that it's just not easy to hit a ball perfect, even off the tee. So we started looking at live stuff at that point and thinking, if it's that hard off the tee, it's got to be ridiculously hard when guys are throwing 95 miles an hour with sink and cut and all the different ways that the ball can move. It's got to be a nightmare. So the more I started looking into it, the more things started not to make sense. In other words, I didn't think that hitters could actually do all the things that the top hitting instructors were talking about. Get your foot down early, let the ball travel, and it just didn't seem like there was that much time to be able to have all that take place and still be 100% on time. So that's when I really started looking at the pitching side of it, was through testing to find out what hitters could and couldn't do. And that list was pretty long, actually. So I guess to answer your question, I'm a baseball instructor that made some weird discoveries about pitch speeds and kind of had to take it to the next level in order to let the rest of the world know about what was really going on with the interaction between a pitcher and a hitter.
Nice. And why, in your mind, what was the idea behind wanting to know what one active velocity is?
Well, I was always a small player as a player, and it always bothered me because I knew I hit the ball harder than most people around me. But as long as you're small, in my era, I played at Cal State Northridge in 2000, or actually, I'm sorry, 2000. In 1984, we won the national championship, and up until that moment, up until the College World Series, I had no idea that I would ever get drafted, even though I really felt like I was one of the better players around. Because I was small. And that time, if you're not 6'4", you're not getting drafted. And you know, it was simple as that. And that always bothered me. It was a little bit on the Moneyball side. Like, I want to prove that there are guys pound for pound that are much better players than the guys you're drafting just because they fit the mold. And so that was part of it, was to kind of start proving that some of the players that I was working with were actually really good, even though they didn't fit that mold. But also, it was a way to quantify. I mean, that kid right there is making swings that I've worked with them on, and they would go to another coach, and the coach would tell them, "Oh, son, you can't hit with that swing here." And in my mind, I'm like, "What are you talking about? That kid's better than anybody you have on your club, and let's measure it and find out." And that's kind of where that started, was kind of a way to end arguments. Because when you talk about hitting, you open up a huge can of worms. Even in today's technology, with the ability to test everything, there's still arguments about what the best mechanics are.
Oh yeah, man, it's crazy. I don't get it, but you know what? That's another conversation for another time. So with the idea of trying to hit the ball 100% on time off a tee,
mm-hmm.
what was, when that thought process came up? Were you trying to find the right mechanics, or were you trying to see what was the goal? What were you trying to improve?
Yeah, it was mechanical at first, for sure. It was what mechanics are going to create the very best contact. And that means the hardest contact, that means the most consistent contact, that means the best launch angle. And so what is it that causes that? And it was mechanically based, for sure. I spent about 4.5 or 5 years as a golf pro. After I got out of after the minor leagues, I taught golf for about almost 5 years. And I really learned to hit after I learned how to hit a golf ball, because it's so precise. And I realized that baseball is so imprecise. And that was one of the reasons why everything that I did was based around measuring, was based around, well, let's find out. If you think that mechanic is the best one, then let's test it and find out. And what I kept finding over and over and over again was, well, no, it's not. That's not the best method, because it doesn't produce as much exit velocity. And when you squish the bug on when you spin on your back foot and squish the bug, you lose somewhere between 3 and 11 miles an hour of exit speed. And there's still players in the big leagues that do that. And when you look at their statistics, they will take a fastball right down central and foul it off about 50% of the time, which is one of those things that happens with that mechanic. It also lets them get underneath the ball, and so they tend to hit weaker ground balls, and they do hit a lot of homers, but when they mishit it slightly, it results in one of those foul tips or a ball that's hit weakly. So it was definitely mechanical based, but I soon found out that there was a lot more to it than just the mechanic side of it.
Sure, and I'm going to get into that because I got a lot of questions on that front. But let me ask, it's interesting that golf, what was the biggest takeaway from golf that you tried? Because one of the questions I was going to ask was, what made you try different things? And you kind of answered that with golf. So what was the biggest thing that you saw with the golf that you tried with the baseball swing?
Well, in the golf swing, if you're 1 degree off, if your club face is 1 degree off at impact, you're a long ways away, right or left. You simply can't play if you can't get the club back to pretty much square. I mean, within 1 degree, you're pretty good, but the second you get to 2 or 3 degrees away from perfect contact, you can no longer play this game at a high level because you're going to be spraying the ball all over the yard. So the precision of it was something that fascinated me when I was learning. Even when I was playing, when I was still playing, I was my brother owned some golf courses in Southern California, and I worked. That's where I worked at during college. So every time I picked up a club, I was getting a lesson. So I learned the game really quickly, and so I would hit balls practice a lot, even when I was playing in college. And during that time, I started making some realizations about how incredibly difficult it is to hit a ball pure with a golf swing. And then I started to kind of think about it a little bit as far as baseball was concerned, but I didn't really put it all together until after my baseball career was kind of over and I started teaching. And when I started teaching, then I started realizing how many huge correlations there are. You know, when you learn how to hit a golf ball a long ways, you have to stretch all the right rubber bands in your body, and the ball's just sitting there, right? So it's all you. And so everything good or bad that happens is you. And so you realize that you have to, if you want to hit the ball 300 yards, you better do a lot of things exactly right. And so every movement is pretty precise. And in golf, they don't argue too much. I mean, there's some peripheral things, but by and large, a long time ago, they agreed that you need to release off your backside. You need to stretch your lead arm and lock it out in order to maximize the ability to repeat your move and to be able to stretch all the right rubber bands. So everybody does that. Not one player doesn't do that. And that's the one thing about golf that fascinated me was they measure it and then they do it. And in baseball, there's so many different swings in the game. It's actually less so now than it was back when I was playing, but there's still huge arguments about mechanical issues. But the reason is because nobody's actually ever tested anything to the nth degree like we have. You know, we're not out there in a big way just yet. I think it's just a matter of time, but the mechanical side of hitting is really, in my opinion, there's a lot of myths out there. There are a lot of things that if you just test them, you're going to find that philosophy does not hold water. It doesn't test out. You can't hit it as consistent. You're not going to hit it as hard. And so that's kind of that's the basis of the correlation. But in golf, it's like this may actually help you a lot. I don't know if you've ever played golf, but you got a ball sitting there, and it doesn't move for the most part. It just sits there, and you load up and you make your best move at it. And if you're really, really good, you hit it. I think Jack Nicklaus said in a round of 69, he would average 6 perfect shots, 6 shots that he felt like he absolutely hit perfectly pure. But all the rest are misses, right? And so it becomes the understanding is that the better your swing is, the better I miss the ball. And even though I might hit that at 98% of my purest contact, that's not 100%. And that might be good enough. And that's where we've gotten to in baseball. Okay. Is that it's good enough. It's good enough to get me there. It's good enough to get me that contract. So why would I ever change it? There are guys in the big leagues that might hit 100 homers if they knew if they really made some adjustments. But we'll get into that in a second. But now picture the golf ball in the middle of my backswing. Somebody moves the ball, right? And they move it closer to me, and they move it higher by 6 inches, let's say. So in the middle of my swing, all of a sudden now I have a new contact point. And now I'm going to have to adjust my swing in order to get the club face to that new location. So I'm going to lose power. I'm going to not swing at it as hard because now I'm adjusting my swing. And it's very unlikely that I'm going to hit it all that solid because now everything's changed, right? That's what hitting a baseball is like, is you load up, just like in golf, But now here comes the ball, and we don't know where it's going yet. We don't know how fast. We don't know in what area. And so we have to wait to see what pitch it is. And when we see what pitch it is, now we have a split second to readjust the swing in order to try to hit it. And that's what the philosophy is. That's the philosophy all around the internet. If you listen to guys talk, I've had a lot of discussions on Twitter or whatever, and that's their basic philosophy: is see the ball away and adjust in. In other words, look to try to hit the ball to right field if you're a right-handed hitter, and then when the ball's inside, you just adjust your swing to hit it. But the problem with that is that you're only at about 70 or 75% of your max when you do that. So if you look at JD Martinez, every time he brings his hands in and adjusts to an inside fastball, he averages about 87 miles an hour of exit velocity in there, which is only about 75 or 77% of his max. Aaron Judge is the same. He's 75% of his max when he draws his hands in to hit an inside fastball. So regardless of what anybody says, yes, you can hit it, but there is a number that says what's perfect. And 75% isn't anywhere near, right? For most mortals, that's not even a homer. You can't even hit a homer. At 87 doesn't leave the yard. So if everybody threw JD Martinez nothing but fastballs in, and he kept the same approach, he wouldn't, obviously, he would adjust. But if he kept the same approach, he would have a very difficult time hitting a ball over 75% of his max. So that philosophy doesn't really work. And the only reason it works at all, because obviously it works for JD Martinez, is that pitching is still in the Stone Age when it comes to understanding what they're doing. They're throwing a lot of balls in the same area that matches what JD Martinez's thought process is. So if you could picture JD with the ball on the tee, pitchers are throwing a lot of pitches that match his perfect spot on the tee, if that makes any sense. So they're throwing pitches that are going in the same angle as his bat. So when a fastball heading down at the bottom of the zone is somewhere between 7 and 12 degrees downward, and the slider is going to be a little more than that downward, and the curveball more than that. And so if you just swing the bat that's somewhere between 8 and 14 degrees, you're going to get a lot of pitches in the big leagues that match your swing plane. And that's why mechanics can work. Different mechanical ideas can work because there's so many possibilities of the way pitchers are going to pitch you. I mean, it's okay if you're at 75% of that pitch if nobody throws that pitch to you, right? Who cares? If I'm only going to get that 1 in 10, who cares? I'm going to focus on the area that makes the most sense. And that's what's going on in Major League Baseball right now. There's a lot of guys whose careers have been made based on really bad pitching philosophy. That's going to change pretty soon, though. Trust me. That part of it is going to come out really soon. The idea that pitchers are still in the dark when it comes to the way they go about their business. But that's why mechanical inefficiencies can survive, is because the world of baseball, the guy that's attacking them doesn't know their weakness. They pitch to their strengths instead of to their opponent's obvious weakness. It's actually not that obvious unless you look at it like I do. It's really kind of hard to see because you look at JD Martinez, you think that guy is awesome, right? There's nothing he can't do. He can hit every pitch. He hits fastballs. He hits curveballs. He hits sliders, and all of that's true. But he doesn't hit all of those in places that would, if you were an EV, if you were a black belt in effective velocity, you wouldn't throw pitches that are anywhere near where it's going to match his bat path or the speed that he's prepared to hit. But right now, that's the way pitchers go about it, is they don't look at it through the right lens, in my opinion.
I like how you explain the concept of a ball on a tee and imagine it moving and having to make an adjustment. So, I mean, I think that's a great visual, and I can see how you're looking at it. So with that approach, looking away and looking in, we're now talking about looking for a certain pitch at a certain speed. Would that be correct?
Yep. Well, every hitter does that, whether they know that or not. And when you test players like I have, the Boston Red Sox hitting coach is Tim Hires. He and I, about 20 some years ago, I think it was 2003. I'll have to look that date up. But we did a test. He was running at that time a huge facility in Georgia. And right near, it was about 10 minutes away from the Perfect Game event that happens in East Cobb, where literally every kid in America that's a high school age player goes through this tournament. It's a huge showcase thing for Perfect Game. And we took 192 players and we tested them at his facility. We tested them off the tee for exit velocity, actually bat speed, ball speed, and we did a live test, reactionary test. And Tim actually ran the live reactionary test, and it was so telling. It was one of those pitching machines, if you can imagine, that where you see the big video and you see the pitcher's motion, and then the ball comes out of this hole where his hand goes to, right? And the pitching machine was really precise, so you could program it to throw it wherever you wanted to. And we were going to use 90 miles an hour, but the more we started thinking about it, we actually went down to 70 miles an hour. So we chose 70 miles an hour, like a batting practice speed pitch. And we set the players up to where they had 8 swings in the first round. And then we had 8 swings that counted. And what ended up happening was we used effective velocity. In the warm-ups, we went middle and middle away. So we set the tee in their mind and the speed in their mind to kind of an away fastball, which is what the world does right now. And so they hit the ball pretty well in the warm-up round. But then when we went to the live round, the one that counted, we went fastball middle in, fastball up and in, fastball down and away, fastball middle in, fastball down and away, fastball up and in. And so the reactionary times were very different, even though the speed of the pitch didn't change at all. Every pitch was within 1 mile an hour of 70. And the locations were in the strike zone. They weren't outside the strike zone jamming people, in that way. They just were in the strike zone, but in those different boxes. There's 9 boxes, right? So we used the ones that made sense from an EV perspective. And the average player, and these are elite Perfect Game players, right? These are elite high school hitters. The average was a 187 hard hit ball rate on 70 mile an hour BP pitches. And that was astounding when you really think about that. That's an astounding discovery, that all you have to do is move the ball around strategically in the zone, and you get players off the barrel that easily. Now, obviously, there were a few players that squared up a couple more balls than some of the others, but the average was 1.5 out of 8. Think about that. I mean, that's a crazy number. And they broke every bat we had. We made them use wood bats, and every one of the bats we had, I think we had 13 or 14 bats. Every one of them that they were using were shattered with 70 miles an hour. So what that shows is that guys are not nearly as good at reacting to pitches as they think they are. And so when pitchers understand that, and they begin to, the analogy of the tee is actually pretty good. If a hitter walks up to the plate and he wants to hit a pitch, he's ready to hit some pitch. He just doesn't know which pitch it is exactly. But through my research, what I found was that the hitter walks up to an outside fastball speed. That's the general first thing that happens when they get into the box. So when you throw pitches, let's just say you're facing a guy like, it doesn't really matter if whoever throws 93, the outside fastball speed is about 90. So when the hitter faces a guy that throws 93, he's going to take his best swings at 90 EV miles an hour. When you look back at the homer totals and you look at the location of the pitch and the speed of it, almost all the homers happen at right around that speed because that's the speed that they're the most geared to. That's where their T is. Their mental T is placed. Okay. So now any pitch that matches that speed, like a slider at 85, but it's middle in, right? The guy hangs it a little bit and it's middle in. It's not because he hangs it that makes the guy hit it. It's because it's the speed matches that outside fastball. So in other words, he could close his eyes and swing at an outside fastball and run into the slider that's inside because that's where his bat is going to be when that slower slider shows up. It's going to be right where his bat was or would be when he makes a full swing at outside fastball. So there's a lot of contact points that could actually run into that bat. So if you had a robot and you could teach that robot to focus at 90 miles an hour, his swing at 90 EV miles an hour, and then you took a typical major league pitcher up there, everybody that threw around 93, they would find it very difficult to miss bats if they did what they do every day. If they threw fastballs, sliders, changeups, and curveballs, they would have a tough time missing that robot's bat. And I know that sounds crazy, but if they just threw fastballs down and away and missed in the normal ways that they miss, and they threw sliders away and curveballs away and changeups away like they do in the big leagues, when you see that, you would be shocked how often that barrel would run into pitches. And that, even though it's not very popular, is exactly what's going on every night in Major League Baseball. Because the second that scenario changes, every hitter's terrible. If I were wrong, then they would hit in all kinds of circumstances. But when you look at, like, for example, last year, Carlos Pena went on and we did a prediction of EV that before he went on MLB Now, and he made a prediction that the hard hit balls in this postseason are going to happen exactly like this. 50% of them are going to happen within 6 miles an hour of the last pitch, EV miles an hour, which is basically what we just described, right? That means that you threw that slider at 85 in and the fastball away, and so the speeds are really close. Or you threw two fastballs in a row that were in the same area, or whatever. You anything within 6 EV miles an hour makes up for about 50% of all hard hit balls. And then 20% of the balls that are going to be hit hard are going to be because there's no tunnel. And then 20% are going to be because you throw it in exactly the speed range that the hitter's the most prepared for, which is that outside fastball speed. And then 10% of those hard hit balls are going to be earned. They're going to be when a pitcher is actually using EV concepts and they're using tunnels and the pitches are more than 6 miles an hour apart. When that happens, only 10% of hard contact happens at the major league level. And I've done 1,000 studies if I've done one, and they're all exactly the same. And that's how I know that what went on in that test that Tim and I did way back when is the same thing that's going on in every big league game every night. Guys are going up to the plate and they're expecting a pitch in a certain area and they're gearing for that pitch. And a lot of other pitches are in that vicinity, in that neighborhood that they swing the bat at. And the second that goes away, and it went away this year in the postseason, you saw it. You saw the Dodgers offense went south because people started elevating fastballs. And now that launch angle swing doesn't work because you can't hit a flat fastball with a swing plane that's going up at 18 degrees. It's just not going to happen. And so that's what I'm talking about, is when pitchers begin to really understand effective velocity, the mammoth seasons that guys are having offensively is going to go away. A really good batting average is going to be very much lower than it is now, because you can't. It's the human animal, the person that's standing in there swinging the bat. It takes too long to swing the bat. In other words, when a guy's throwing 93 plus, and everybody is, that's the average major league speed now. So when you're talking about 95 mile an hour fastballs on average, there is zero chance that you can stand in there like these kids did in that test. They couldn't do it at 70. Big leaguers can't do it at 95. You can't wait to see what the pitch is and get around on a 95 mile an hour fastball inside. Can't be done. Of course, they can expect that pitch and sit on that pitch and hit that pitch, or they can do what big leaguers do. They can hit it at 70% of their max and wait for the pitcher to come back to that happy zone. And they always do.
Yeah, man, the amount of great information there. So for the people that are listening who may not be familiar with you and your work on the EV, effective velocity, can you talk a little bit about what that is and why it's important to understand?
Well, on the most basic level, a fastball at 90 miles an hour is really only 90 miles an hour. It's hard to explain because it's a very complex thing, but on the core level, it's really simple. Everywhere I throw that 70 mile an hour batting practice pitch that we talked about before, when I throw it, let's just stay with that for a second. If I throw 70 right down the middle, then whatever the radar gun says it is, that's what it is to the hitter. It's 70 miles an hour of speed. And because the hitter's world is in the middle, right? They practice in the middle. They put the tee in the middle. They hit the ball up the middle in the batting cage. That, everything is about the middle. Everything's about middle. And so when you see the ball in the middle, that's the one that they're kind of geared to. They're actually late to that, but they're only a little bit late. They're geared to the outside fastball speed because for 100 years we've been taught that the best pitch to throw is an outside fastball. And so when they hit a pitch at 90, in their mind, they're not really hitting 90. In their mind they are, but in reality they're hitting 87. It's always about 2 or 3 miles an hour later than they think. And that's why even in the middle, they're actually late on a ball that's right in the middle. Brent Strom, I've done a lot of work with Brent, and he made the comment one time and actually got in trouble. But the middle is actually way better pitch than middle away by a lot, because it's 2.5 miles an hour faster than the version of that same pitch on the outside part of the plate. So speed is really relative. It changes because the hitter's reach changes. So if we go back to our tee analogy, and I put the tee in the middle, and you throw a pitch at 90 miles an hour right down the middle, then I'm going to time that up. I'll be a tiny bit late, but eventually I'll time that pitch up pretty good. But now you move the ball to the inside part of the plate, right? Just 6 inches. So it goes from middle to inside. Well, the bat is making a circle, right? So if I continue that circle out to the place where I'm going to be at maximum swing efficiency, it's actually 18 inches further out in front that I'm going to make contact. It's not like right next to it. It's not 6 inches away. It's 18 inches away because where I have to reach in order to make contact. So 90 miles an hour middle in is really 92.5, because now I have to hit it as though it was a 92.5 mile an hour fastball because of where it's at. That's a hard concept, but when you get on a plane, they always tell you exactly when you're going to land, right? Because they know we're taking off from LAX. We're going to be traveling at this distance, we're going to be going this miles an hour. We know the wind's in our face, so we'll adjust for that. But then they put in the most crucial piece of information to be able to tell you when that plane's going to land. And that is, where's the landing spot? Well, in baseball, you don't have a landing spot. You go up to the plate, and there's 150 places within 6 inches of the strike zone that the hitter can reach. In other words, if you could throw a fastball within the hitter's reach and you didn't have very much command, there's 150 different places that ball could go within the strike zone and within a 6-inch area around the strike zone. I mean, that's a lot, right? That's a lot of area. And every one of those places that you throw the ball, it actually has a different speed, a different landing time, because the hitter has to swing a bat that takes him 0.13 seconds, 0.15 seconds with some players. It takes 1/3 of the flight to swing the bat. So before the plane lands, they actually have to start swinging the bat in a place where they think it's going to be. And so that's why it's so weird and hard to explain, but it's really kind of easy if you think about it. A fastball away, you have more time. And the same fastball in, you have less time. And that's really what the core essence of effective velocity is on that smallest level is, the ABCs of EV is that its speed is location adjusted. You have to adjust the speed based on the location because the time changes.
Yeah. So as a hitter, I tell you what, I'm gonna give you two questions. So as a hitter, why is it important for me to understand that? And then the second one, as a pitcher, why is it important for me to understand that?
Well, it's less important for the hitter I shouldn't say that. If they don't understand it, then they're bound to repeat the same timing mistakes over and over and over and over and over. How many times have you heard the announcer go, "Oh, he fouled that straight back. He's right on that." 20 times a night, right? And they're actually wrong every time they say that, because the hitter is in every major league swing, the barrel goes down below the pitch line and then it makes its way back up to the pitch line. If you watch the arc of the swing, they're all upward, basically, to some degree. And they all go below the pitch line and then they make their way back up to the pitch line. So if they were actually on time, or they were really close to being on the pitch, like they tell us, then they would foul it off half the time below. In other words, when the bat goes up through the pitch line and I'm early, I catch the top of it when I foul tip it. And when I'm late, I catch the bottom of it and foul it straight back. Well, about 99.9% of the foul balls that happen at home plate happen straight back, meaning they're always late. They're always about 2.5 miles an hour late, and they don't know it. And so that's why they don't adjust, is because they don't know that they're late. They think that they're on time for that. And so that's why it's important for hitters to understand it, is because speed is lying to you all the time. And if you go up to the plate expecting speeds to be the way they look against EV pitching, you have no chance, and that's what you're starting to see. There was a lot of good effective velocity examples in this year's postseason. The Brewers, Derek Johnson has been a long time EV follower. Brent Strom is a long time EV follower. Jim Hickey, who was with the Cubs, was one of the original guys that I introduced EV to in 2005 when he was with the Astros. Andrew Friedman was with the Rays when I worked with Carlos Pena, and he also was with Jim Hickey with the Rays. And so the Dodgers front office understands effective velocity to some degree. And so everybody in the playoffs, literally, the one thing that they all had in common was they had an effective velocity education to some degree or another. And so if you don't understand speed as a hitter, you're bound to make the same mistakes over and over and over and over. And it's really difficult to find out what's wrong, because that's that's how this whole thing started, right? It's a measurement. EV is a measurement of timing at the core. And it's also a measurement of deception for pitchers. And so if for pitchers to understand what EV means, it's night and day. The first guy I worked with was Barry Zito in 2005. And he threw 87, right? 88. And so 2 or 3 miles an hour added is a huge deal. So if you go back and look at film of him, you'll see him elevate fastballs a lot back in the day when you lived at the bottom of the strike zone, because that's what everybody told you was the only safe haven. It's actually very wrong. That's the highest exit velocities down there. They're the lowest. Yeah, there's about 20 reasons why the fastball at the bottom of the strike zone is a terrible idea. But that's the way we lived for a long time. We lived under that myth. But Zito was living at the top of the zone, and because it hid his changeup and it hid his slider and it hid his curveball in the dirt. And so he learned EV tunnels in 2005 and dominated for that season. He was unbelievable at 87, 88. You know, he could touch 90 at times, but for the most part, he lived at 87, 88. But 88 up and in is about 92, 93. And now all of a sudden, 93 with a 80 mile an hour changeup, though that's a huge speed differential. And so his hard hit ball rate was ridiculously low because it's just too hard when you don't have any. When the pitch is coming out of the same chute, it looks the same, but there's a 20 mile an hour difference. Forget about it. It takes too long to swing the bat. There's no time to adjust without making big adjustments in my swing, and that costs me exit velocity. So the one thing that pitchers, I'm sorry, go ahead. The one thing pitchers can control is exit velocity. They can't really control all that much about what the hitter does. I don't know what the hitter's thinking really, but I do know after testing for 20 years and observing for another 15, I know what hitters are expecting. I know what they're thinking. I know what they're prepared to hit. And so with that thought process of what knowing what the hitter does, it's actually really easy for pitchers to miss bats, but they choose to do the opposite. They choose to throw pitches right towards that tee instead of completely away from that tee. So if you could imagine that tee, right, standing there again, and I'm a pitcher, and I've got 4 pitches that look like they're going right at that tee. Only one of them goes up and in instead at 100 effective velocity. So it like a Craig Kimbrell fastball. To a right-handed batter, that fastball looks like it's on the outer third when he lets go of it. But it ends up all the way up and in. In other words, it looks like it's going right to that tee. But instead, it goes up and in way faster than I'm ready to hit. So their mind is at 95 away, but the ball is at 100 in. And so now the next pitch is that slider that looks like it's going right at the tee, and then it's gone in the other batter's box. So that's what a hitter's up against, is that they get fooled because they're expecting the ball to be going towards that tee where they're ready to hit. And the pitches that look like they're going there and don't, and they have 6 miles an hour, that's only 10%. That makes up for 10% of the hard hit balls that happen. That's it. That means 90% of all hard hit balls are happening as a result of pitcher error, pitcher bad strategy.
You had gotten into talking about tunneling. So why don't you talk a little bit about what that is and what it means?
Well, an EV tunnel, and there's a lot of people out there talking about tunnels that have kind of borrowed that, so to speak. But pitch tunnels from an EV perspective means that when the pitcher lets go of a fastball, let's say he throws his fastball, it creates a line, and it's on two planes, right? It's on a horizontal plane and it's on a vertical plane. And so one of the first things we did was test to see what hitters could see. And the first thing that hitters can see within about 5 feet out of your hand is where the ball's going, up, down, in, or out. So once the fastball's thrown, your mind sees this line. And now when a pitch is thrown that is a different type of pitch, like a slider, then the slider, if it stays in that same line, and when I say line, I mean, and that's why it was called a tunnel instead of a plane, because the tunnel means that if you were to create an actual tunnel, both of those pitches would be coming out of it. They would both be on the same vertical line, plane, and on the same horizontal plane. So they look exactly alike coming out of the hand. And they travel that way for about a third of the way to the plate. And any pitch that does that is what I would refer to as an EV tunnel. Pitch has an EV tunnel. So the typical pitcher that throws a fastball, let's just say up and in, and then if it's a right-handed pitcher with a right-handed batter, and the right-handed pitcher throws the ball up and in, and then they come back and they throw a slider down and away, when they let go of both of those pitches, they're going to look really similar to each other, if not exactly the same. The pitchers that are really good, like a Scherzer, his slider and his changeup and his fastball look absolutely identical when they come out of the hand, with only slight spin changes. Everything else looks the same to the hitter, but they go to three different parts of the strike zone at three different speeds. That's what a tunnel just is, basically the idea that pitches look alike coming out of the hand. That's the easiest way to say it. And some tunnels are really good and some tunnels are really bad. There are some tunnels that are actually killing pitchers and they don't even know it because they have them at the wrong EV speeds.
Oh, so it's measured off speed.
Yeah, because to be an EV tunnel, a good EV tunnel, you have to make sure that there's 6 miles an hour of EV speed between the two pitches. So we're getting pretty complex, but CC Sabathia is a great example. Against right-handed pitchers, back in the day, he threw 95, 96. And when he throws 95 up and into a right-handed batter, the effective speed is really 100, okay? Because it's up and in, and that's the extreme. That takes the most time away from the hitter. He has to hit it the furthest out in front. And so, but he also throws a sinker that at about 92 that looks identical coming out of the hand. And then the four-seamer stays straighter and the sinker moves away from the right-handed batter. So it moves to the middle away part of the strike zone. So 92 turns to about 88. So against right-handed batters, he's got 188 that look exactly the same, and they're both fastballs. That's a huge advantage to a pitcher. So now if you flip over to the left-handed batter's box, now that same fastball that was up and in to the lefty or to the righty is now up and away to the lefty. And now when he throws that sinker, same tunnel, it looks exactly the same to this hitter, but now that 92 moves to middle in to the lefty, and now it's 95. So he's throwing the first fastball at 95 is 95, and then the sinker is now 95. So he's actually throwing two pitches that have the same reaction time and doesn't even know it to left-handed batters. So a lefty batter that sits on a fastball up and away, and then he throws the sinker middle in, will run right into that. He might not even know that it's a different pitch. He just swings the bat at the up and away fastball, and that other one runs into his bat. So that's a really bad EV tunnel. that one hurts him, and most pitchers don't even know when they're doing that.
Yeah. So as a pitcher, what does that mean in terms of how do they develop that? How do they kind of start working on the tunneling concept?
Well, there's a ton of ways to do it. There is, You can overlay pitches with video to find out where your ideal tunnels are. You can, now that some of the technology has gotten better, they actually do 3D versions of the tunnel, which is something that my patent kind of covers. So we'll be talking about that at some point. But at the end of the day, it's about learning when your pitches look alike. The easiest way for a normal person to do it that's teaching it is to videotape from that center field camera view. But you see it every night on the internet. You see guys doing overlays. They're about 10 years late to the party, but that was when I was doing it. It wasn't legal. Major League Baseball would shut you down if you showed anything like that on social media. But somehow they changed that, and guys have gotten pretty famous doing overlays. But we were doing overlays with Carlos back in 2009 in order to show him what pitches were hiding and what pitches were not. So that was how kind of I got my PhD in effective velocity at the big league level. Was working for Carlos in 2009, helping him do his game plans every night based on EV.
Right. So talk about that a little bit. What is the process like to developing a game plan based on EV?
Well, if I'm facing CC Sabathia, then the first thing I got to do is figure out that 95 up and away is the same as 95 middle in. And so I get 2 for 1 if I understand that. And then you start doing some math to figure out how often he does things and what's the likelihood that he's going to throw a pitch that looks like this but ends up out of the strike zone. And so you look at data and you combine that with pitcher deception. And I'm going to look at about probably 70 plus different things before I come up with a game plan that makes sense. But when you look at those 70 plus things, it is super obvious as to exactly what your game plan should be. Every pitcher in the big leagues is making big mistakes when it comes to their game plan. There's holes in every major league pitcher's approach, with just a few exceptions that are really difficult. Scherzer, Kershaw of old. Now he's become very predictable. There's tons of pitchers in the big leagues that would have 0 holes if they knew exactly what they were doing. But when you don't know what you're doing, you're bound to have a lot of crossovers. You're bound to throw, when you move your fastball, for example, up and in, down and away, middle in, middle away. Every time you throw those pitches, you're changing the speed, right? Maybe the best way to think about it is like this. If you had a young pitcher, would you tell him to throw the slider up and in, down and away, middle in, middle away? No, the slider is designed to do one thing, right? To look like a fastball and move away from a right-handed batter if you're a righty pitcher. So the slider has a very distinct purpose. It's supposed to be a medium speed pitch, and it's supposed to look like a fastball, and it's supposed to go to a slower part of the strike zone. So you wouldn't tell that pitcher to throw the slider up, right? That's hanging, as they say. But we do tell them to take the fastball and throw it all over the strike zone, because that messes with the hitter's timing. In reality, you're actually helping the hitter dramatically by doing that, because the fastball is called a fastball for a reason. It's supposed to be fast. But when you throw it away or down, it's no longer fast. It's the slower version of the fastball. So a fastball down is hanging, just like a slider up is hanging. The fastball down, in fact, you're 4 times more likely to hit a fastball down hard than you are to hit a hanging changeup. Imagine that. You can hang a slider, and I can't remember the exact numbers. I did this study, and it was One of them was 4 times, one of them was 3 times, and one of them was 2 times with the off-speed pitches. But the worst was, let's just call it a curveball. I think the hanging curveball, in fact, no, I think that the curveball was 4. Don't quote me on this, but it basically, if you hang a curveball, you're at least 2 times more likely to get away with it than you are if you hang a fastball at the bottom of the strike zone. Bottom of the zone's fastballs get hit with the highest exit velocity, the most homers, the most hard hit balls happen when hitters have a chance to see the fastball in an area that they expect, and it's going at the line that they expect. It's going downhill, like their swing's going uphill. So that's an accident waiting to happen, and yet every front office has 20 guys in there saying that the best place to live is at the bottom of the strike zone. I'm not sure what metric they're using to see that, but it's what led to the homer explosion.
Yeah, so let's take that to more of the college and the high school level, and they're kind of all living in that little outside corner too.
Not all of them. There's a lot of them now that are EV focused.
Really?
Yeah, I would say
nice.
Probably 3/4 of the high level college, have been introduced to effective velocity,
really?
And they
That's
understand
great.
it to some degree, but they're not black belts. Virtually everyone in baseball at every level understands effective velocity at the sexy level, right? The tunnels are easy for anybody to understand. But they don't understand the different nuances about it. They just know that if you hide a pitch, it's going to end up being harder for guys to react to. But unless you add in the EV speed, and like with our CC Sabathia example, you don't know whether that tunnel is good or bad. That tunnel actually hurts him against lefties, and he doesn't know it. Well, maybe he knows it now. I don't know. But at that point, he didn't know it because he continued to do it. There's actually a bunch of lefties that are in that same boat. Felix Dubrant did the same thing. There were many guys that had that same scenario. Cliff Lee did that same thing to lefties. To righties, it was devastating. To lefties, it was not advisable. So it's at the end of the day, there's a ton of high school, college coaches that understand EV. I've been doing this for a long time now, since 2005 is when I released the books. 2004, and guys are all over the place. One of the first guys the first guy that I introduced it to was Tom House, because I wanted him to punch holes in it for me. And Tom was like, "No, this is why a beer keg like me could pitch in the big leagues. is you're right on the money." And he actually was really good friends with Bobby Valentine. They spent time together in the big leagues. I think on the Rangers staff, he was the pitching coach when Bobby was the manager at one point, when they had Nolan Ryan. And he at that time, Bobby Valentine was over in Japan, and he hadn't won a championship over there yet. But Tom went over there and introduced pitch tunnels, and Bobby won his first, whatever it's called over there, national title over there. And that was the next year after that was the first year of the World Baseball Classic. And the World Baseball Classic, if I would have told you before it started that Japan and Korea were going to be in the top 2 out of the 3 top pitching teams in the world, I would have been laughed out of baseball. But they were. They were, I think, first and third in the best pitching staff in the world baseball classic that year, because every pitcher had tunnels. Every pitcher was hiding pitches. They had Koji Uehara on that team. I think, and Matsuzaka, and every guy had pitch tunnels. They were hiding pitches. They didn't know the ins and outs of it, but that's how this works. And at the college level, high school level, EV is rampant all over the place. Everybody's using it. They're trying to anyway. They're using the version that they understand. That's the hard part, to get anybody to go deeper than that, because some of the experts in the world of internet gurus they're telling everyone that effective velocity doesn't really work because the speeds it doesn't add or subtract speed as much as the theory says, and so you can forget about the EV portion of it. It's just about tunnels. But the EV part of it is actually the most important part. It's the part that it's the landings. If you don't understand how speed works in the strike zone, you're doomed to make a bunch of crossover mistakes, like
Yeah, and just for the people that are listening, can you define crossover mistake?
Well, I throw a fastball at 96, but I throw it down and away. It's really 91, and I throw my cutter at 88, but I throw it middle in, and now it's 91. So I'm throwing two pitches that the radar gun says are 8 miles an hour apart, but in reality, they're exactly the same. In fact, the cutter could actually be faster than that fastball if I threw it to the up and in part of the strike zone. So a crossover means when your faster pitch is getting slower and your slower pitch is getting faster. Look at it like this. This one I've had a lot of success with making people understand. Picture yourself as a defensive back, and your job is to cover two receivers. Okay, and I'm a quarterback, and I'm gonna send my receivers out 10 yards apart, right next to you. So where are you gonna go to cover both of those guys? You're most likely going to go exactly in the center, right? Because by the time I take the football back and start leaning towards the guy I'm going to throw it to, you can quickly take a step or two and be there in plenty of time, right? So it's a no-brainer that you're exactly in the middle when I send out guys 10 yards apart. So now I send out guys 20 yards apart, right? You're still going to go in the middle, but now you can't quite get there as quick. And so now there's going to be a tendency for you to lean a little bit. So now you do some stat work, and you realize I go to the guy on the left a little more often. So you're going to kind of probably lean in that direction, right? And then do the best you can to try to cover both guys. And then now I'm going to send them out at 30 yards apart. Now there's no way that you can cover both of those guys. And so what's going to end up happening is you're going to go to a predictable place on the field based on what your assignment is. And if you're assigned to cover two guys, then it's really difficult when they start to get more than 15 yards apart. So now picture you're the same defensive back, and I send out three receivers, but I send them all in your general area. Like one guy's going to do a post pattern, and the other guy's going to be on the other side of the field, but he's going to come across the field heading towards you. At the big league level, that's what a crossover is the quarterback is sending all these guys right to you, right to you, and in an area where you can cover three guys, even though you're 30 yards downfield and you're just standing there. They're literally going to throw their three receivers right in your general vicinity. That's what's happening at the big league level right now is because they don't understand effective velocity speeds. They keep throwing pitches that are moving towards where the hitter is defending. That's probably the best way to describe it. I don't know if I don't.
Yeah. So I Yeah, I think that paints a good picture. So really, when we kind of sit down and kind of look at it, it's speed that we're talking about, not so much movement, but speed.
It's speed. Yeah, the movement changes the speed, but it changes it
Right,
either positively or negatively, right?
right,
It
right,
everything depends on the hitter.
right. So
But
if I'm a hitter, and I'm looking at a certain speed, and the pitch is in that speed, I'm hitting it.
well, you're going to have the best chance.
Right. The
You
best.
still have the hard part of hitting is no
Sure,
matter
sure, sure,
what
sure.
no matter what happens, you're going to fail 60% or more.
Right. So I guess the question is you're sitting on a
But you're right.
speed more than you are a pitch.
Yes, you're right on the money. Is that's what hitters are doing right now? Is they're living in a speed range, and pitchers are throwing a lot of pitches in that speed range, a lot, and pretty soon they're going to stop it. And when they stop it, that philosophy is going to not have any idea what to do because right now they're just swinging up and
Right.
they're getting a lot of pitches that are just going down, and they're going down in that speed range that they're the most prepared to hit.
Right. So you had mentioned something earlier that when they figured this EV concept out at the big league level, hitting gonna get much harder than it already is. So what do we do now? What do hitters do when they figure this out?
Well, they have to train completely different. That's why when I made the discovery of EV with Tim way back, I mean, it was actually a little bit earlier than that, but um, once you discover EV and you understand, all of a sudden you start hearing the things like we first started talking about: get your foot down early, see the ball deep. You know that none of those things work really. They really don't work anymore unless pitchers are going to cooperate fully with you and throw pitches in your speed range in your area. And so you have to start training different. You have to. What happened with Carlos was one of those guys. He was a see it, hit it guy, and our first conversation was pretty funny. I'm trying to explain to him what EV is, and he's like, I just could never imagine myself sitting on a pitch. And I said, he goes, I'm just a see it, hit it guy. I said, okay, so I've done a little research, and in 0-2 counts, 0-2-1-2, that's the most reactionary counts, right? Where you have to see it and hit it. You're hitting 0-85 in those counts. So, and you're leading the league in strikeouts. So really, are you good at see it and hit it? Because those are the most reactionary counts, and you're not that great in those counts, and you're swinging and missing a lot. So in reality, you're not quite as good at seeing it and hitting it. And so my question is, what do you have to lose? When you look at a guy like Roger Clemens, he had about the reverse of that. He had an 0.85 batting average in 0-2-1-2 counts. I can't remember what the study was. It was like 3 years, or it might have been more than 3 years, but I think it was 3 years. Guys hit 0.85 when he gets them to an 0-2 count. And so I asked Carlos, what do you think he's going to throw? He's going to throw a slider, a split, changeup, and a fastball. So where's he going to throw the fastball? He's going to elevate it. Okay, well, what's he going to do with the slider? It's going to be down. Is it going to be in the strike zone ever? No. He's never going to make a mistake with that, hardly ever. How about the split? No, it's going to be down. So of those three, what can you hit? And he said, well, none of them, because I don't hit the fastball up very well. I said, well, what if you hunted it? What if you sat on the fastball up? Now, what would those pitches that are at the bottom of the zone look like? And so you would start taking those pitches and you would start hitting the pitch at the top of the strike zone because you're expecting it, you're ambushing it. So immediately, I'd rather have an 0-2 count with Roger Clemens than have an 0-0 count, because I got no idea what he's going to do 0-0, but I do know that when he gets to 0-2, what's going to happen. And so I have a big advantage if I understand that. And I'm going to strike out anyway. So what it doesn't hurt me in any way to think about that completely differently. And so that made a lot of sense to him. And he actually got better during 2009. His strikeouts went down 25%. His batting average went up 25%. And his chase rate outside the strike zone went down 2%, meaning he was already great. He didn't chase very often. He was like in the Joey Votto 20% chase rate. And he went down to 18 during that period and hit a homer every 8.5 at bats. So his ability to be 100 on time with 100% of his mechanical efficiency, that happened way more often, and yet he chased less and he struck out less. So that's what a hitter has to do, is they have to understand what they're up against, because you cannot cover everything. You can't cover the whole zone at all those speeds. It's like trying to cover 4 receivers all over the field. You can't. It's physically impossible.
Right, and this is where, guys need to start paying attention to how pitchers are throwing to them. At the professional level, in the college level, they get access to data to help them. But these younger guys got to start paying attention and learning until they get to the level. They've got to learn to kind of pay attention.
Yeah, and it's more than that, actually. You have to not only pay attention, because you could watch Roger Clemens go about his business and still have no idea what he's doing, and still have no idea how to combat that. You have to think about it from a completely different perspective in order to really understand how to use speed in a way that's going to help you the most.
Right, and you said something earlier yesterday that a guy could possibly hit 100 home runs if they wanted to, and if they would develop a better plan. So can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that? How can a guy hit 100 home runs?
Well, a guy like Aaron Judge, who, in my opinion, has some swing things that aren't ideal, and primarily that just means his swing plane is way too upward. So he's going to crush fastballs down, sliders that are heading down, curveballs that are heading down. But fastballs that are flat, he's going to struggle with that. Same with a bunch of other guys. But he has the ability to hit a ball at 75% of his max and hit a homer. So if he were to max out his everything, and I'm not saying that he's that far away, but I do think there are players. Avisail Garcia hit a ball at 125, and Judge's max is 122. Kevin Kiermaier, I think, hit one at 126. And so when you tell me that less strong hitters have higher exit velocity than him, my only answer to that is, I just don't think so. I think his approach is making him not square up the fastest pitches. In other words, this is one of those things that makes me crazy. There was a study done. There was somebody noticed that Giancarlo Stanton kept hitting all these off-speed pitches at max speed, right? His maximum exit velocity was almost always on an 80 or 79 or 83 mile an hour pitch. And so they concluded that, well, if all these pitches are being hit, the highest exit velocity is happening at low velocity pitches, then the speed of the pitch doesn't really matter. In other words, the old adage that the harder it comes in, the harder it goes out is false, which is ludicrous to say, because what's happening with Giancarlo Stanton, if you look at his data, he never hits a ball at 95 miles an hour up and in anywhere near his maximum swing efficiency. So if you look at that number 100 100% on time with 100% of his swing efficiency. When he gets a fastball in, he's about 70% on time with about 70% of his maximum. And so he's hitting that fastball in at 70-70. And yet Major League Baseball is looking at that because he does that and he's at the elite level. That's the best way to do it. And the answer to that is not no, but, hell no, that's ridiculous. So if he were to change his philosophy and understand who it was that was going to pound him inside, and he sat on that pitch when it made the most sense, and he actually squared that pitch up at 100 miles an hour, you would see Giancarlo and Aaron Judge lift the bar again. In other words, because the speed is greater, they're going to have greater exit velocities when they square up faster pitches. They just don't. They don't square up faster pitches because it's not their game plan. That's how data can lead you down a rabbit hole. If you just look at the data and you draw a conclusion based on that without testing it. Nobody tested Giancarlo Stanton at 70, 80, 90, and 100 miles an hour pitches and said he actually does hit the 80-mile-an-hour pitches harder. Nobody did that because it wouldn't happen like that. If they tested all those things, they would find that the 100-mile-an-hour balls that he hit were in the 128 exit velocity range. And that's one of the things that makes me crazy about the game is data is it's only as good as the interpretation. Data is not science. By itself, data is not science. It's just all it is it allows you and I to create theories about stuff. But until you test it, it's just a theory. And that's why EV is really the only science when it comes to pitch sequencing that there is, because I tested every aspect of it way before I went to the major league databases to see that it was right. I tested every part of it. That's why I know it's going to change. I know that it's only a matter of time before major league players start to really realize what they're leaving on the table by not understanding EV.
Right, that both hitters and pitchers.
Yeah. Well, hitters will find out really quickly because when what they've been doing stops working, like it did in the World Series and in the playoffs, you saw a lot of it.
Yeah.
All those really great bats went away, except the few that were the one thing you saw in the playoffs also was that the Boston Red Sox has the best offense because one of their guys, Tim Hires, understands EV. He's training in a different way. They're looking at things in a different way. And that's the one offense you saw that didn't really go that far away from their norm. Everybody else fell off the planet.
So if I'm a guy listening and I want to know, obviously you have your books and your program, which we can find on hittingittheguest.com, and I highly recommend it. If I were to take something away from this conversation, what's my action item to start implementing EV into my thought process and my training? So, as a pitcher, I need to learn about EV speed tunneling, and then as a hitter, I need to understand kind of EV speed.
That's a loaded question, man. Because you we spent more than an hour talking about what it means, right? So there's a learning curve just to understand what is happening. And then to actually start putting into play is another conversation again. But at the end of the day, the first thing is to educate yourself so that you get it, you understand it. And once you understand it, it's almost like, well, I'm kind of going to know what to do because if the pitcher's going to fool me with tunnels, then I have to get better at seeing I have to get better at my homework, and I also have to get better at seeing little details. And so the future of hitting training is going to be actually a lot of fun. One of the things that we started doing right away is we got these small little foam training balls that are about the size of a golf ball.
Yeah.
And from 18 feet, you can actually create kind of like a big league slider movement. Whereas with a baseball throwing BP, you can never get that kind of movement. But with these small balls, you can get, sinker movement and cutter movement and slider movement, and you recreate the same time. And so you can actually have at bats that are closer to real life in some respects. I mean, it's never going to be the same, obviously,
Sure.
But in a practice setting, if I can create the same angle, the same timing, the same look, basically, of the pitch, one of the terms that EV came out with was the term shape, which was the idea of when a pitch it starts off, it looks kind of straight. It goes straight in the beginning, but then when the movement kicks in, it develops into a shape, like a cutter and a slider and a sinker and a four-seam fastball. They all have different shapes. And with hitters recognizing pitches, you have to recognize the shape, because the shape tells you what the speed is going to be. And that's difficult. It's at that speed, it's very difficult, but it gets easier when you have everything going at that speed, all your training.
Yeah.
Pardon me. But that's the future of training. That's where it'll be a lot more fun when you really understand what's going on. See, this is just a big chess match. And the hitters made a move. They made a move they started swinging up, and they started swinging in a speed range. That was their move. And the pitchers haven't countered yet. But when they counter, it's going to be ugly.
Yeah.
And the counter is effective velocity. That's the answer. And when they do, you're going to see some crazy things happening with that. But the big takeaway for me is just educate. You have to educate. You have to understand that there is a lot to the game. When it comes to pitchers and hitters, there's a ton of it. And so EV is the explanation. It's the thing that tells you what's really going on. It's like the gravity of hard hit balls. Mm-hmm. You don't have to understand anything about gravity to trip. And EV is determining success with the pitcher and the hitter every night, whether they know it or not. In most cases, they don't. But the people that know precisely are the ones that are going to dominate coming up.
Yeah.
So educate, get the books, understand that the video program is really cool. It's a lot easier when you describe it rather than read it.
Yeah.
It's a little bit difficult to read something three-dimensional like effective velocity and really understand it. I had a lot of people say to me they've read it 3 or 4 times and they still have questions because it's hard. It's hard to without like the idea of the T and the idea of the quarterback and the defensive back. That helps, I hope, because
that does help. Yeah, absolutely.
It puts it more of in a 3D atmosphere, which is what's really happening.
Great. Well, sir, Mr. Perry Husband, I appreciate your time. I learned a lot. I'm pretty sure my listeners will as well. So I could do another whole podcast with you, but I'm gonna let you go, and I appreciate your time.
You're very welcome, and it was fun. We'll catch up sometime down the road.